In this episode of The Houseline, we're diving under the sea with an amazing lady who has dedicated her life to protecting our coastal and marine ecosystems. She's a coral reef ecologist at the Institute of Marine Affairs. She's project operator for the Maritime Ocean Collection through an NGO called Speseas, and also has a column in the Tobago Newsday, which is collected on the blog Wild Tobago. Dr. Anjani Ganase, welcome to the house.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
So how's it going?
It's pretty good.
All is well?
Yep.
Well, we are finally in, today is February, the 1st of February.
Yes.
I think it was the longest January ever, according to the memes on Facebook. And it was a little nuts as well because, I mean, we started off the year, there was the like Australian fires going on, and then we went to World War III, which was
almost.
which was supposed to take place, and then there was the flight that got shut down.
True.
And then what we have?
Well, last night, was it the UK separated from
Brexit.
Yeah.
Brexit.
It actually happened.
It
so-
actually happened.
Yeah.
And then we have coronavirus.
Yeah. Well, that's
That's
what everybody's talking about.
Yeah, and then people talking about if we should cancel Carnival and that kind of thing.
Never went.
That would never happen.
No.
Somebody was like, all those people are saying cancel Carnival, they should cancel themselves.
I think that's the one escape where we have. It's pretty heavy stuff, right? So
Yeah.
why-
True.
why?
Yeah, I don't see that happening. So so we're happy to have you here. First scientist in the
house.
In the house, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Maybe you could kind of start about maybe a little bit about what exactly is your sort of like mission or goal, or how did you fall in love with the oceans and decided to put yourself on this path?
Sure. Well, obviously I had an island upbringing. I spent most of my childhood down the island snorkeling. My grandfather used to take me Scotland Bay and do a lot of snorkeling and just the beach life, right?
Right, okay.
I swam growing up. I played water polo, so
Right.
always on the water. And I tried to keep it that way as long as possible. And I think I was the only foolish person to be like, how could I stay on the ocean and do what I, continue to discover things and explore things.
Because you're like, I like this kind of water life. How could I do this? How could I stay in there full time?
Exactly. I don't really want to work.
Right.
But,
Okay.
Yeah. Little did I know that it was a lot of work.
Right.
So I picked the one university that had an undergraduate degree in marine biology. I went to school in Florida, and then it just kind of kept going. After that first degree, they're like, well, you can't really do anything with this degree. You have to keep studying. So I'm like,
Right, okay.
fine. Then I picked somewhere else on the map to go, and it has been a really good journey, and I mean, there is a lot of work involved, but
Yeah.
I'm
You love
pretty, yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people use that word, at least, for me, it's just enjoyable. And
you were in Australia for some time as well, not so?
yeah, I did my PhD. I came back to Trinidad in the end of 2017, so I was there for about 6 years. I
Right.
did my master's there, and I just stayed. It was very expensive to come home, so I
Right.
just. Sorry, is that hand waving?
No, that's fine. That's fine. You
I
could
told
wave.
I'm like,
You
I
could
get it.
wave your hand as much as you want, like I do it all the time.
Yeah.
But just do try not to knock down
Yeah.
the microphone. But we should be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah,
cool,
so I
man.
stayed and I did my PhD, and that was a really good opportunity to see a lot of coral reefs around the world and learn a lot of things from a lot of brilliant scientists over there. Australia is like the mecca for coral reef ecologists because
Right.
they
Right.
have the largest reef in the world.
Which is the Great Barrier.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
And so I learned a lot about that, and and I just came home to sort of be able to sort of apply what I learned here. And this is my home, and if I'm gonna be passionate about something, might as well do it.
Right.
With something
Of
in my
course.
backyard. So
Yeah. So what do you do at the Institute of Marine Affairs?
So I'm a research officer,
Right.
and I specialize in coral reef ecology. So the point of the Institute of Marine Affairs is to do research to supplement policy or decision making. So we focus on a lot of local research. So my lab is essentially the coral reefs of Tobago, and
Right.
we try and assess their health to help build management plans and policy plans for protection and conservation.
That's awesome.
If there are any accidents or incidences around Tobago, that affect the marine environment, I can advise on how to treat with those situations. So it is a lot of advising and research, which is essentially what I love to do.
And then you're involved with some NGOs as well.
Yes, I'm a member of Speseas, and it's a fairly young NGO, and we're essentially a group of scientists who all felt that there was a bit of a gap in the knowledge of marine environments in Trinidad and Tobago,
Yeah.
and we felt that we can fill that role and sort of tell people what we have in our marine backyards. So, I'm a coral reef ecologist. We have a turtle biologist. We have a deep sea biologist, fisheries biologist, and so we have an array of scientists who can sort of represent or speak about these marine environments. And, and so a lot of it is communication oriented projects that we do. So
That's cool, man. So, like, what are some of the? Well, maybe we could even start with like what is in our waters for somebody who doesn't snorkel or dive.
okay.
What is our
What's out
ecosystem
there?
like? What is out there?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually kind of learning that too, because I've just gotten back, and even though I dived or snorkeled in places before I studied, coming back as a scientist, it's a very different picture.
True.
Right.
So Trinidad is very different from Tobago in terms of the marine environment. Of course, we're more affected by the Orinoco, so our waters are darker.
Right.
You have that seasonal influx of that brown water from the Orinoco, and
Yeah.
of course, we have that industrial coast, the Gulf of Paria. But with that said, you get a lot of marine communities. You don't get full coral reef.
Do we
reefs.
actually have reefs in Trinidad?
Yeah, we do.
We do?
Yeah, we have our only reef system is in Toco.
Toco,
So
okay.
Salivia Beach. There's that very shallow patch reef, and then I'm sure the reefs sort of extend as you go deeper, but
Right.
Right.
because of the conditions, I know you've been to Toco. It's
Yeah.
rough most of the time of year. It's very difficult to explore, but I think it's our only coral reef. Tobago being much further away from Orinoco, a lot more clearer waters because corals need light to grow.
Yeah.
They're present right around Tobago, but we
Right.
have so Trinidad, we have a lot of mangrove ecosystems, and that feed a lot of our fisheries and whatnot. So it's still rich in biodiversity, but I think it's a lot less explored because a lot of it's done in Tobago. A lot of the nicer postcard marine environments are found in Tobago, but Trinidad definitely has a lot of marine environments that still need to be explored.
Tell me about the mangroves, because like I know some years back, like I think Movie Town wanted to do some expansion, and people were like, "No, but the mangroves." And like, how important are the reefs? Like, how important are the mangroves? Like, why should people care? Why is this something that we should care about deeply?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the Movie Town incident, but mangroves are, wherever you have mangroves, you should essentially keep them there. They're considered like the livers of your rivers and streams. So they do a lot of filtering out
Right.
of nowadays pollutants and nutrients before they enter the ocean.
So that would be like if a river is at the river mouth and passes through mangrove, then so it's like a filter
Exactly.
before it hits the ocean kind
So
of thing.
the Carney Swamp.
So
or
if
the
there's no river
Carney-
there, then we could
everything gets flushed directly into the ocean. So
Right.
they dampen a lot of the sediments. So if you do any land clearing, they're very involved in sort of settling out that, that muddy water, the particulates, So
and
it
do
creates-
fish actually live in them?
Yeah, they're important nurseries. So a
Right.
lot of the juvenile fish species, they like to hide out because, the mangrove roots create this kind of complex
Right.
terrain that is very
Right.
difficult to be eaten.
So they can actually like hide in there from like the
Exactly.
big fish, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so you find a lot of juvenile sharks, a lot of our big predators, the fish that we like to eat, you know,
Yeah.
you find their juvenile species living in mangroves. So
Okay.
you do have an interest in wanting to protect the mangroves for our fisheries and whatnot. So our major wetland is the Caroni, and then you have the Nariva. Nariva is more freshwater, so it's very different from the Caroni
Right.
environment, which is more brackish water. And so that because of the different types of water quality, you will have different marine organisms or fish species living in each one.
Yeah.
So
Very interesting. I find what you said about the Orinoco. You know, like the water coming out of that and going into the ocean affects the life around it
Yeah.
in a big way, you know. So it shows like the connection with the land and the ocean,
Yeah.
you know, like it's all connected.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean now a lot of the catchphrase these days is ridge to reef. So whatever you
Ridge
do,
to reef.
ridge to reef. So
Okay.
the ridge of the mountains to the coral reefs at the base. So the first ecosystem, marine ecosystem that you are exposed to as you come off the beach is your coral reefs, or you know, that shallow reef environment. And basically whatever you do upstream is going to affect
Right, because
everything
it
downstream.
all washes down,
Exactly,
right?
it's all
Okay.
connected.
Yeah.
And so there's you know, a lot of people try and use that sort of analogy to sort of guide people in, you know, how they clear land or where they build their houses, you know.
Right.
If you do it on-
Drainage, things like drainage and
Exactly.
all that. Yeah.
It's all connected. Everything you put down your drain will end up in the ocean, you
Yeah.
know. So it is we need our filter
So like when
system.
I washing my dishes and thing and all that soup going down
Yeah, I think, you know, like laundry, anything that ends in your drain will get flushed.
Eventually.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
It's
Right. So what about like the reefs now? So if I were to visit a reef, what sort of things would I see? Everything.
Amazing. Where do I start?
I mean, I just know like
Things
what
that
I
I've never seen before.
I just know like, you know, what I've seen on TV from like documentaries and that
Yeah.
kind of thing, and
Yeah.
and you know, lots
Planet
of colors,
yeah.
lots of different fish.
Well,
and
yeah, yes and no.
eels,
So a
I
lot
don't
of
know.
people think of Finding Nemo when they think of coral reefs.
That is
right?
exactly what I was gonna say. Finding Nemo.
Yeah, which is true. If you're in Australia and you live along the Great Barrier Reef, you're gonna find those reefs. And so, what I try to do is try and show people what Caribbean reefs look like. They're
Right.
they're very different. So
Okay.
you have thousands of species that live on the Great Barrier Reef. You have thousands of species of corals that branch and plate and pretty weird stuff as well that grows in and amongst them. But in the Caribbean, you only have hundreds of species of corals.
Only hundreds.
Only hundreds. Well, it's like 150, so it's
Okay.
not like hundreds.
Right,
But
okay.
but it's actually very beautiful and scenic. They look like little You have corals that look like little mountains underwater.
Right.
You do get some plating corals and branching corals, but a lot of our corals are brown.
Right.
And you do get pigments of green, shades of yellow and blue, but it's not as brightly colored as the Great Barrier Reef. It doesn't say that it's not as nice, but it
Right.
is a different kind of beauty.
And what is a coral exactly? It's because it's alive, right?
Yeah, it's an animal.
But it's not a plant.
No, it's not a plant.
It's an
It's
animal.
an animal.
It's
It's
an
an
animal.
animal.
Wow.
It's related
It have
to...
teeth?
They have tentacles.
They have tentacles?
Yeah.
All of them?
Yeah. They're
Really?
the cousin to jellyfish, right?
No way.
So like, but they're very small, and so how I try to explain it is, so they're the cousins of jellyfish,
Right.
but they don't drift in the ocean. They actually settle in one spot and they grow like a tree. Well, they
Yeah.
grow and they multiply into a colony, and they have a skeleton. So their skeleton is made from rock. So that's why reefs are so important, because they actually
So
create
is
like
it that
these
it
buildings.
absorbs the rock, like the animal absorbs, because you say it's made of rock,
Yeah.
right?
Okay,
So it
so
absorbs the... Maybe you explain it.
yeah. So another difference between jellyfish and corals, that corals have pigments, and so they are brightly colored compared to jellyfish, which are translucent, and that's because they actually form a symbiosis with algae, or if you want to get into like a zooxanthellae, that's what you call it. It's a type
Okay.
of algae that lives in its tissues, and
Right.
basically the algae photosynthesizes in a very safe environment because it's not being eaten.
Right.
It's in the
Right.
tissues. It can multiply and live there. And so it provides the coral with a lot of food and energy for the corals to grow. So the corals can, they draw the minerals from the water column to create their rock skeleton. And it is the reason, because they have so much energy, they can build huge structures. So you have a single coral polyp, which is like a one individual,
Right.
can grow, like, so it can be like the tip of my finger to the size of this room. You have a single colony that can grow
Right.
these massive structures. And
Where
that-
does
yeah.
and is that all one organism or is it several? It's like where does
Are you
one
testing me?
coral being or
Yeah.
animal
yeah.
end
How do you
and the other
identify
one,
one?
and then the
Yeah.
other one begin, or
It
do they
is-
all sort of like merge with each other?
No. They're definitely individual colonies. So they would be genetically similar in this same colony.
Right,
Although,
okay.
you know, there's always new science that we're still discovering a lot of stuff.
Okay.
That's my disclaimer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but you definitely have individual colonies of different species, of course, and then you have different genetic makeup. So you do find variations even within the same species, right? Just
Right.
like you and me, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But we grow and live in different places. on the
Right,
reef.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So does anything eat coral? Like, do they have any
Yeah.
predators? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it would taste very good. It's like they're like eating stones.
No, there's some fish that, like parrotfish. Parrotfish eat algae, but they also scrape. So, it's the coral is actually mostly rock, but there's a very thin layer on top where the
Mhm.
parrotfish like to scrape, and that's the tissue of the coral that
Right.
gets eaten. So you do get some grazing. A lot of corals take each other down and like through competition. So
Oh,
they have
really? Wow.
tentacles. So at night, the tentacles come out and they actually feed, and they collect things that drift onto their tentacles and they eat it. So you can feed a
Right.
coral.
So they feed at night.
They feed at night. During the day, they
Ah.
kind of just chill out and get the food from the sun through the algae. So you have corals that you can feed shrimp, bits of shrimp, and they would take it, and you can
Whoa.
actually look at it.
I've
Yeah,
never thought of it that way.
it's a world on a different scale. It's
Yeah.
very,
No, I mean, like I've
Small.
seen what is that? What is the documentary series? I think you mentioned it earlier. Deep Blue.
Well, Planet Earth is what I
Planet
said.
Earth is one of
Yeah.
them.
yeah.
But you know, like every time you see one of those real like super deep ocean when they send the probes down,
Mhm.
like the kind of life forms you see down there, completely alien,
So
Jack.
Yeah.
alien, yeah.
You know?
And that's what happens when you remove light from an ecosystem.
Yeah,
you
and
have
they're all
things that
clear and they're glowing things,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
kind of nuts.
it's very bizarre.
So like so you're saying that the mangrove is sort of like the nursery. So what is the coral reef then? Where does that sort of fit in?
They're like the
What-
underwater cities.
Who would we see in there?
Everybody.
Yeah?
It's a metropolis.
Is it
so-
mostly just small fish? Or?
No, you get everything from everything in the food web. So you have the grazers, so like the fish that feed on algae, to top predators. So sharks come and visit reefs.
Right.
You get
It's like the buffet for them.
They just-
All you can eat.
Yeah, sometimes they come to feed, sometimes they come to get cleaned. So it's literally a city.
Sometimes they
You
come to
have-
get cleaned.
Yeah, so you have cleaner fish that come and they groom. You know, have
Right,
you
yeah,
watched
yeah,
the
like a kind of
car
sucker,
wash?
like a sucker fish kind
Wow.
of thing.
Yeah, they do. So they would line up. You get the manta rays lining up in a very orderly manner. The turtles get a bit rowdy. I've seen them like push each other off to sort
To
of
be
get
first in line
exactly.
to get cleaned.
So they're not as orderly, but
Right.
you know, a lot of things. If you have a surface underwater, it's going to get slimy and dirty. You know,
Yeah.
things just grow on it, and so that's what happens to anything that lives underwater. So they have to be cleaned, and they can't reach their
Right.
back. You know, they can't. So
So it's like a turtle car wash as well
exactly.
then. A turtle wash.
Yeah.
A shell wash. Okay.
Shell wash.
Any job you can think of, they have it on the reef. So,
Right, that's
yeah.
super cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are the biggest threats facing the reefs in the Caribbean?
Well, this is where it's gonna get really heavy.
I think it's like a whole bunch of, I mean, there's climate change,
Yeah.
there's
I mean, there are local pressures. Caribbean reefs have a very long history of disturbance. We've been fishing out our reefs and our oceans for over hundreds of years, since
Right.
back when you had pirates of the seas and the colonizers. They've been hunting turtles and sharks and whatnot. So we have a very long history of overexploiting our oceans, and that carries on to our reefs. So you no longer see sharks and groupers on Caribbean reefs. I surveyed maybe over 100, over 100 reefs in the Caribbean, and I probably saw sharks on 2 or 3. That's how rare it is. It's not just.
Is that because
Trinidad.
of Shark and Bake?
Yeah.
Do they actually serve shark still?
So
It's definitely some kind of fish.
yeah. I'm sure it will be a shark species. Remember, sharks they are the great whites, the hammers, the top predators that we all think are sharks. But you can get smaller species of shark. You have the reef sharks that are not as big. So you can get small, tiny sharks that live in the reefs. They're walking sharks. They're
So there are quite a few species that you're saying that are what is endangered or what is under threat
I think a lot more of the
besides the sharks.
The sharks.
The top predators is what you're saying?
Yeah, it's called fishing down the food chain.
Right.
So you start with the top predators, you take them out of commission, and then you go down and you fish out the next level. So the smaller sharks, the groupers, when they're no longer meeting your demand, you go down a bit, and then you start fishing on the parrotfish and the grazers. So you're sort of wiping it out from the top to bottom.
Right. I mean, it's kind of the big fish, right? Because I mean, there's all the stuff that we eat, right? It's the shark, and then we have there's kingfish. Carrot. What else do people eat? Mahi is quite popular.
Yeah. Mahi, I'm told, is supposed to be more sustainable because they do reproduce a lot quicker. They have they're not as long lived, or they have quicker reproductive cycles than other fish. So it can get complicated when you're like, what should I eat or what shouldn't I eat? I would say stay away from shark.
Yeah.
I know it's
I think it's really just in the Caribbean, like anybody else you tell them to eat shark, they'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Like I don't think anybody eats that. Who else eats that?
In Australia you do
They
get
do?
some and I mean, obviously China and a lot of the Asian countries drive the demand for shark fin,
Shark fin soup,
So
but they actually used to I don't know if they still do, but I've seen like footage where they would pull it up, they would cut off the fins and then throw the whole shark back in the water because they just want the fins.
It's worth much more.
That was kind of crazy.
And it's much more efficient. So you get a lot more. You can catch more sharks if you just leave the shark off the boat, right?
Right. Less stuff to carry.
Exactly. Why pull it out to throw it back in and
they need to send it to Trinidad.
Yeah.
Well, they need to stop. No, that's what they need to do. They need to not eat sharks.
Yeah, and then you have the lionfish. So there are like substitutes. I think there are alternatives to shark that you can definitely include, and it's hard to change culture, but sometimes you need to do it. It's just not sustainable.
So what are the most sort of like destructive forms of like fishing, right? Because there's a man with a reel or person, whoever, like throwing a rod or trolling or whatever. But then, to me, it seems like it's the big net fishing. And then you see every now and then you see these horrible videos where some turtle is caught up in a net or some animal is caught up in a net, like real heartbreaking stuff. I mean,
you nailed it. It's trolling.
Yeah,
I would say is the most destructive. When you do shrimp trolling, you're scraping the bottom. Even if you had, a lot of them don't troll on proper reefs, but you have these reef habitats where they're pulling up hundreds of years of coral growth and sea fans and everything else that lives on the bottom. So I think the statistic is like for every handful of shrimp that you get up to 100 kilograms of bycatch, and that goes from all the corals to marine turtles to dolphins to anything that gets caught in that net. In the Pacific, I don't know if we have it much in the Caribbean, but in the Pacific you have super trawlers, which are like nets that go for kilometers, and they and they just sweep up everything in between.
So as humans, we've just gotten like
very efficient.
too efficient at this stuff.
Exactly. So my rule is, I like to know where my fish is caught, the species, so if you and your partner are fishing, I think that's more sustainable because you are fishing for yourself.
Exactly.
and enough.
And there's
to
no
s-
bycatch, right? You're catching what you're...
Exactly. Well,
yeah. Unless you get
there
crapple.
are trade-offs, Ron.
Right. You have a recipe
need
for
to-
crapple?
You need to adjust your fishing method if you're getting crapple fish. But I was never good at fishing, and I think I got all the catfish. So that's
Catfish in
Catfish.
salt water?
Yeah, in brackish waters. Yeah.
Okay.
So like in Florida, you fish near the
right.
mouth and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I actually grew up in Maracas Valley, and there's a river that used to... Well, we had some steps going on to the river. Still there, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of catfish in our river. But I certainly wouldn't eat it. It's not a good-looking fish. Anyway, so that is sort of what is affecting the actual fish in our seas. What about the actual reefs itself? I mean, you did speak about the trolling and it's scraping the bottom. But then, what about like sea temperatures rising? What about stuff like, in Tobago, there's tourism where people are diving down and they're going and they're stepping on it. Like, how big of a problem are those sort of things?
Yeah, pretty big. So, you nailed it. So you've got the fishing. So when you remove the fish from the coral reefs, like I said, they have different jobs. You have the grazers, you have the fish that eat the other fish and control other populations on the reefs. And when you sort of lose that control, you have things like algae overgrowth because you don't have the graze. Algae is a competitor to corals.
Right.
So having space on a reef is it's like prime property. So if you have a surface to grow on, you do whatever you can to like fend off your territory and sort of expand. And the major competitor to coral is macroalgae. And so and a lot of what we're doing to our oceans and reefs now are sort of encouraging algae to overgrow these surfaces. So land-based sources of pollution, like I said, we have a lot of nutrients that we put down on our drains, and that is the reefs are the first things that meet these pollutants.
So things like fertilizers as well.
Exactly. So about so nutrients causes algal blooms, and so that will affect the algae on the reef, but also the water column gets murky. Corals need light to photosynthesize. So if they can't get that light through a murky water, then they're not going to do very well. You have, I know Buko Reef has a long history of being physically damaged, so either by boats or people walking. You have cases where one threat is more severe than others.
Right.
And then you have, so that's local threats, and you have the global threats. So climate change is the big one.
Yeah.
And that is, the waters are just getting too hot. So it's kind of like a fever. You work well within a certain temperature range. Corals do the same. They function normally as the temperatures rise. One thing that breaks down is that relationship with the algae that lives in their tissues. And the algae finds that the environment and the coral is no longer to their benefit. The coral's not functioning, and so it breaks down, and that causes coral bleaching. So because the algae actually leaves the tissues of the corals, they bleach, they turn white because they actually have no more pigments. So,
is it still alive when?
Yeah, for a time it's still alive, but if the temperatures persist at a higher degree, then they starve. They're no longer getting this very efficient food source, and so they would starve, and then they eventually die. Sometimes in mild cases they can regain their algae, and then that's fine. They do survive, but more and more coral bleaching events are getting more severe. It's kind of like the wildfires in Australia.
Yeah.
The wildfire season is getting longer. It's getting more intense because it's just hotter for a longer time. It's
hotter. I think they were going through like a drought as well.
Exactly. So it's that in the ocean. So although you had the wildfires this year, I think one of the biggest bleaching event was in 2014 to 2016, where every summer it was just too warm for the corals, and so they would bleach and die. And then you had back-to-back bleaching where the next summer is still too warm, and you find these not just in places that are compromised. A lot of people think, these reefs are already compromised because they're not healthy because of local impacts. You go to the most remote places in the far North Great Barrier Reef or in the Pacific Islands, and they're bleaching because the water is simply too hot, and that speaks to climate change itself. It's evidence that it is happening, that our oceans are warming up.
Right. So what are some I mean, it's a major question here, right? I mean, what are some things that people can do? I mean, certain things need change on like a government and policy level, right? So that's like the climate change thing. But maybe let's talk about, before we even get there, maybe we could talk a little bit about how stuff that we do sort of affects.
Yeah.
Because you were saying from ridge to reef.
Ridge to reef.
So everything that we put in our drains or whatever gets washed down. Like so what are some things that we could do to help? I mean, I don't know.
Well, exactly. So a lot of scientists have advised that local action does help with climate change. So you're basically providing the reef with as a nice habitat to be able to not just withstand, but be able to recover. So we're kind of saying, like, put them in intensive care, correct their environment, and then they'll do their thing. They can.
There are
recover
cases
quicker.
of recovery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They literally just need time, right?
Right.
So, but if they're bleaching and then you have, we're taking out all the fish that help the corals grow, and you're like making the waters murky, they don't have a chance. So we have to reverse all those things. I think for me, coming home, the first thing is I think everybody should know where our reefs are, try and visit.
So like awareness.
And then I think just by visiting a reef, explore and see what a reef is like, and then
it's there.
So it's there, and that like.
So that I don't want to throw this thing in the water because it's somebody. Well, it's, as you said, it's like a metropolis in there.
Yeah. So you're more aware of your actions. Things like land clearing or like agriculture, there is that level of at the business level where we need to manage our infrastructure, where we build along the coast affects the reefs, because as soon as you put a hard surface down, the water rushes right off, right? As opposed to if you have trees and soil, that would absorb the water. Right. So a lot of management in that way. Things like know where your fish is being caught and the type of fish that you buy. Say no to parrotfish. Say yes to lionfish.
Right.
Right. Parrotfish are basically they help the corals find spaces on the reef because they eat the algae. So it helps the coral to regrow.
But are people actually eating parrotfish? Like they don't sell it in a grocery, do they?
No, I don't. It's more common in other places around the Caribbean.
Right.
It's creeping in Tobago. So the symptoms
because there's less of the other
exactly
stuff, right?
So we're now experiencing where you go to the fish market in Tobago and you're seeing the brightly colored parrotfish now being things. So Jamaica, they've been doing it for a long time. Parrotfish is one of their favorite foods. Yeah. So but we're now sort of adopting that, unfortunately. But I think because we have this lionfish issue, you can sort of focus on, like asking your restaurants, hey, do you serve lionfish? If enough people ask, maybe they will start sourcing lionfish.
So maybe let's talk about the lionfish for a while. So it's an invasive species, not sure?
Yes.
It's not really from the Caribbean. How did it even get over here in our waters?
So it invaded our waters, supposedly. Either they were released in Florida,
right?
Or either
actually, I think you're right. I think I saw a video with something like that. So the same thing you were talking about, like bycatch. So like big trawlers or whatever would scoop up a bunch of fish, and then the lionfish, I think, was part of the bycatch.
Well,
and they've been throwing it back in the water before they go to land, because the same thing is like just too much stuff to carry back. Yeah. And then maybe they multiplied.
Well, they're from the
I
Pacific.
think I read something like that. Right.
So
Oh, they're
you're
from the
halfway
Pacific.
correct.
Okay.
So like, yeah, if you're trolling, you're probably still trolling in the Atlantic area. So you're
Yeah.
probably collecting native species. But lionfish are very pretty. So they're ornamental fish. They're used in aquarium trade.
Ah.
So a theory is that they were released from tanks or because of some disasters. So if a hurricane hit Florida, they got released from some
Right.
aquarium
Yeah.
in Florida. And then from there, because they have no natural predators in the Caribbean, they just multiplied like crazy. Yeah. and
I
took
think they do like
advantage.
hundreds of, is it millions of eggs or something?
Yeah,
like,
something
Yeah.
crazy like that.
like
yeah.
almost every day or whatever.
Yeah, every 2 days or something.
But they
Don't
also,
quote me on that.
yeah, they produce a lot of larvae and they feed on a lot of our juvenile fish.
Right.
So they kind of like vacuum clean up a lot of the little fish and they don't get a
I
chance
saw some
to...
some videos like it's like the mouth is big like a grouper
Yeah.
and it's just like
Yeah.
the fish just it's like sucked up like a vacuum. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And they're quite bold-faced here. I mean, when I lived in Australia, lionfish are so rare. They're not top predators, so they have to hide out. So they have to watch their back when they're catching their prey. In the Caribbean, they don't care. They're on top of the reef. You know, like I can go up and touch it with my fin, and he'll be like,
Wham.
you know, yeah, exactly. So rude, you know. So.
So nothing eats them here in
Not
the Caribbean.
naturally, no.
Wow,
there are
that's crazy.
cases where people feed them to like sharks and
Right.
groupers and whatnot, and you know they think that that's a solution, but they're just getting a free meal, so they don't care what fish you're feeding it. You know, so it's not like, oh, this lionfish tastes good, I'm going to hunt them. They probably just keep coming back for free meals.
Is it? It's in Australia as well.
It's native to Australia.
It's
Yeah.
native to Australia. So what have they been doing?
Well, naturally.
Well, it's native. It's native, so it's
exactly.
not really throwing things off.
And they're balanced there with
Exactly.
other,
So the sharks know that they exist. The
Yeah.
groupers know that they exist, and all the big fish, they know that you're on the menu. You know? So
yeah.
they've been evolutionarily been trained to target them.
Right.
Not in the Caribbean. We try and encourage people to catch lionfish so we can be their predators, you know, and it's worked. You know, Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, they've been experiencing lionfish for over 10 years.
Right.
And so they've been controlling it through derbies and just including it in their menu as a cultural item. And as the lionfish sort of expanded their range in the Caribbean, they came down the Greater Antilles and to the Lesser Antilles and came to Trinidad. So it's newer for us, and I think the model that Bahamas uses is a good one. Right? Yeah.
But do we know how many lionfish are out there? Like,
they're here and they're here to stay.
Wait.
That's just a fact of, it's going to be impossible to eradicate them. You could start training sharks to do it. Maybe in 100 years, sharks eventually would do it naturally, but we need the sharks there too.
Right. So we need to stop eating the sharks.
Yeah.
you do lionfish
You know,
instead.
so maybe they can help us out a bit. But
Right. So tell me about the NGO that you're with, Speseas. What are they about?
So as I mentioned before, you know, a lot of our interest is in communicating the science of marine environments and just introducing people to the different marine ecosystems around Trinidad and Tobago. So, for example, I've worked on a couple projects. So in 2018, we had the International Year of the Reef.
Right.
And that followed the whole global bleaching event.
I think I saw that on your Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was basically a 1-year campaign that targeted schools and businesses, and to try and engage people to just be more aware of coral reefs and the importance that they serve to us.
So what did that look like? You would actually physically go in schools for like a 1 day, what is it, like a pop-up workshop or something?
Yeah,
or?
I mean, I was
Or what do you do?
unemployed, so I could do anything. So it was a lot of discussions at schools. The previous project I worked on in Australia, they came out with a documentary called Chasing Coral,
Okay.
It's on Netflix, so you should have a look.
Oh, nice. Cool.
And it talks about coral bleaching and global warming. And basically, we had a school. We invited all the schools to Movie Town, and we had a screening there. I would take it to schools who wanted it, and so we'd show them the documentary and have a discussion about what's happening to coral reefs. I went to summer camps, and had activities. So it was all about education and outreach.
Right. And tell me about the project that you were saying involves the Google Street camera thing. What is that about again? I mean, it's not a street camera because it's underwater.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, underwater. So it was when I was doing my master's in Australia, and I was lucky enough to be part of a project called the XL Catlin Seaview Survey.
Right.
And basically, it was a group of advertisers from Sydney who loved to dive, and they were just frustrated at the fact that people weren't seeing what was happening to coral reefs, right?
Yeah.
And so they thought it was just a advertising problem, we'll show them,
Right.
and they would fix things. And then what they realized is a little bit more complicated. So they created a 360-degree underwater camera. So it was just
Right.
a camera, 3 cameras in a housing.
Yeah.
That was just attached to an underwater scooter. And it allowed us to collect 360-degree imagery of coral reefs. And so they approached us at the University of Queensland, and they're like, what can you do with this thing? And we're like, well, we can do a lot, and
Right.
and so that's how that project was born.
So kind of like how Google Street View works, where you can use Google Maps or Google Earth or whatever and zoom in and kind of do like a tour of a city. So did you all connect it to some platform, some system where you can do that as well?
Yeah, there
And
are
is it available anywhere online that we can check it out?
Yeah, there are subsets of reefs around the world where you can take that little yellow guy and throw him in the ocean, and
So through Google you can actually go down to ocean level. Okay.
So there are
I didn't know that.
certain places that you can do it. We have all our images are collected on the Global Reef Record,
Okay.
and attached to those images, it's more scientific based website. So for all the images that we collect, part of my PhD was trying to get useful data out of these images. So it's a pretty picture, but what is it actually telling you about the reefs? So we used technologies that you use for facial recognition. We trained a machine to recognize certain coral species.
Oh wow!
And it was a lot of training, and so we automated the process. So we gave the machine an image of the reef, and basically the machine gave us data in return. So it's X amount of corals, X amount of sponges, and so we were able to use that data to characterize our reefs in different areas. We surveyed the Great Barrier Reef, Hawaii, the Caribbean, Indo-Pacific areas. It's a pretty full data set that you can go on to this website and
it's all available for...
Yeah, it's all free.
What's the website again called? Sorry?
The Global Reef Record.
The Global Reef Record.
Yeah. If you just Google that, it should
all come up.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And it's really useful. So, a lot of places that we went to, it can be a useful baseline. So any scientist who's like, oh, I've never seen what this reef looked like, instead of tugging and bringing all your gear and having to do a dive, especially in remote places, they can go up and be like, oh, somebody surveyed there. This is what the reefs look like. This is the data. You can go back and survey it and compare it to that baseline. And so working on that project, in 2013, we surveyed about 10 to 13 countries around the Caribbean. Of course, Trinidad Tobago was not one of them, because they wanted to get a representative of reefs in different areas. And because we're so influenced by the Orinoco, we have a very different type of reef. And
but why not Tobago though?
Tobago is also influenced by the Orinoco. So in terms of marine environments, it's a very isolated system compared to this. What we would say the center of biodiversity for reefs in the Caribbean is around Jamaica and Cuba. So they have a little bit more species than in Tobago, and a lot of the connection goes down to Tobago rather than up. So Tobago does not reseed reefs higher up in the Lesser Antilles, we get a lot of the corals coming down. And so it is quite unique in that sense. But because it was not on that project, when I came home, I'm like, I really want people to see what these reefs look like. So I reached out to my partners in Sydney, and I was like, can I get a camera? Can you loan it to me for a year? And basically, that's how the Maritime Ocean Collection was born. So
we're gonna get Tobago there.
Yeah, it's unofficially online, but we are launching a website called the Maritime Ocean Collection, and you can use that website to to dive. I think we did about.
So how many reefs in Trinidad and Tobago?
It's all in Tobago, unfortunately.
Come on, we gotta do a little Toco visit.
I know, I tried. I actually did go, but the conditions were not suitable.
That is true. No, Tobago is Toco is rough.
Yeah.
Toco is rough. Yeah.
And when you have an expensive camera.
Yeah, okay. I get it.
So I did try, and don't worry, I'm gonna continue to try with Toco with videos and just to get some imagery up there. But we surveyed about, is it 32 sites around Tobago. If you know, there are reefs in every bay around Tobago, and basically we jumped in and took a collection for every bay. And so on that website you should be able to virtually dive all these different reefs. You can be able to explore it for yourselves. It'll be available on Google Street View as well. So I think it'll be good for tourism. You know, a lot of people do use Google Maps to find out what can be done. So their places of interest includes these reefs.
Yeah. That's
awesome.
Cool, man. So maybe let's talk about like plastics for a while, because I know there is, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. The kid's name, this young guy who invented some, it is like this massive thing that's like scooping up plastics from the ocean, because like from what I'm reading, it's like microplastics apparently is a huge thing. So even when plastics break down, it's almost formed like a plastic dust or something.
Well, yeah,
and
it's
actually
fragments
inside of the fish. So some fish that we're eating, we're eating plastic.
Yeah,
basically,
it's very pervasive.
Like how pervasive is that?
Well, I think, that kid is doing more than most, I would say, in terms of his innovation. So
his last name is like Buoyant or something.
Yeah, I can't remember.
It actually sounds
I think the boat's still in the Pacific, just collecting plastic. So if you imagine, I'm trying to remember I'm not going to remember the exact statistics, but so plastics came about like 1950s, right? Yeah. And it's just been skyrocketed the amount of things we use plastics for, right? Everything. And imagine from the 1950s to now, all the plastic produced in the world still exists, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't go anywhere. It fragments. It gets smaller. So now we're seeing it popping up in remote islands, in the stomachs of birds, in the stomachs of fish, sharks, marine turtles. And that's because it just doesn't go away. Yeah. And the biggest problem of all the plastics, so I'm not going to say like don't ban all plastics, because we do need, there are certain industrial plastics, so like this table, or there are a lot of things that are reused a lot. And last a lot.
Single use is the real killer.
And that has been the majority of the problems have been single use. So the straws, the plastic wrappers, everything that is wrapped in plastic, packaging stuff.
I mean, some Caribbean islands have also banned styrofoam as well, right? Yeah. And I think I heard a little buzz about some movement here to do the same. Yeah. I don't know where we are with that, or if you're familiar with anybody behind that, but
I think I'm similar.
But if you think of like every box lunch in the whole of Trinidad that everybody is eating, it comes in a styrofoam box.
Yeah. True.
And you take it and you throw it away.
Yeah.
But then even like some of the groceries, like
so many
I could have swear I saw like a banana in a plastic wrap the other day, and I was like, the banana has its own skin. Like, why are you putting that in a plastic?
Exactly.
Or
it's a bit ridiculous.
There's a food place I went to, and they had wooden like cutlery, wooden knives and forks, which is great, but it was in a plastic, like a plastic wrapper. I was like,
Yeah.
what was the point?
We really need to
You know?
adjust our thinking around plastics. I think in the last budget they mentioned that they were going to ban plastics and specifically single-use plastics.
Certain, yeah.
And in government buildings or
Right.
government institutions, I think that would be the first place that they were going to try and do that ban. I've not heard anything of it. They said they
Yeah.
were going to do it at the beginning of this year. We haven't heard
And I know
anything.
there are at least one or two companies that I'm familiar with that are doing the biodegradable styrofoam alternative boxes.
Yeah.
In fact, I think Pecos sells them, or there's the option.
Yeah.
I think you have the option to pick one of those.
Yeah. I think so. A lot of people, so the thing about the biodegradable, you have to really be careful to know what conditions they biodegrade under. So it's not not necessarily a matter like you can throw them out in a landfill and they would degrade. Sometimes they require heat and pressure
Right.
to sort of break them down. So industrial,
Yeah. It's a
grade.
process. Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
And a lot of recycling is also another option, but these are sort of low hanging fruits when it comes to the problem.
Yeah.
Dr. Ladana Kanhai, she is a specialist in plastics, and she works at UE, Trinidad UE, and she says that you need to turn off the tap. So the real
What do you mean?
solution is to reduce your plastic use completely.
Yeah.
Because as long as you're converting one to the other,
Yeah.
or you're using other types
still
of
introducing
plastic,
it.
you're still introducing it to the
Yeah.
environment, and
Mhm.
the quantity is the problem,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
You can recirculate. I think only 9% of everything all the plastics we use is recycled. Out of
Mhm.
all the plastic, it's only 9%, and recycling is.
And in Trinidad, it's probably like nothing.
Well, it's not. See, the thing about it is, it's a problem in the U.S. Remember, China used to collect all of U.S.'s plastics and
Right.
recycle it, and now China's like, no, we don't want it.
Yeah.
So now even the U.S. is not doing it. A lot of it's a global issue, and we haven't solved it. And
What I also heard about the whole recycling thing, I think it was on, Penn and Teller had this show, and they were talking about how the actual work involved, like the trucks, the process, all of that stuff involved to like recycle, also adds to the whole
yeah, it's a huge carbon
carbon footprint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like,
So-
I feel good recycling this
You
thing,
solve one problem, and
but then you
cause-
cause another problem for yourself.
Exactly,
You
and that's
know?
why recycling is so. The 3 R's we remember as kids, right? There's a reason why you have 3 R's in that order, right? So the first one is reduce, the second one
Right.
is reuse, the third one is recycle.
Yeah.
So you're only recycling a portion of the waste that we're actually
Mhm.
producing,
Yeah.
right? The
But
first
on
thing
the
is
list is
It's
to
is to
reduce.
reduce,
Yeah.
and
I mean, even with like water, I've switched to like a water bottle. I see you came with your water
Yeah.
bottle as well,
Mhm.
because just buying bottled water like every
Yeah.
single day, it just adds up. If you just look back a month to see how many
Yeah.
water bottles you've gone through, like it's
piles
ridiculous.
up pretty quickly, and you're one person, so
But yeah, I mean, having something like just a Brita filter at home
Yeah.
or something, or some sort of filtration system, and then just fill up your water bottle and
Yeah.
take it to work. You know?
and we can learn a lot from other places. So in Taiwan, everybody walks with their little metal case of their chopsticks and their fork and knives and forks,
Right.
and that's just in their bag. I do the same with my shopping bags. It folds up quite nice. I know you
Yeah.
guys don't have bags, pockets, but like you can keep bags in your car and
Yeah.
stuff. And so
Well, I'm married now, so I think I could pull off a man bag. You know, like I don't have to
Nothing
worry
to
about
lose.
trying to pick up anymore. I'm like off the market now, so I could get a man bag, I get a fanny pack. Like
exactly, and
you
your
will-
personal utensils.
Yeah. No, but I mean it makes sense. I mean I'm a slight germaphobe as well, not like ridiculously, but like if I'm opening up if I'm pushing a door, like I wouldn't push the door where everybody hand goes, like I push above it.
I do the same too,
And
or
I
my
kinda-
elbow or something.
Or like I hit it at elbow or something.
My foot, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or like if I'm pressing a button in an elevator, I don't use my finger. I would use like my knuckle, because the finger I might use to pick up something to eat, or I do kind of stuff like that. But yeah, what does that have to do with anything?
But no, plastic solved a lot of that hygiene issue.
Right.
I mean,
true.
I understand why we've gotten here.
No, I actually know. Yeah, I now remember where I was going, because basically, because I'm a slight germaphobe, it makes sense for me to have my own cutlery, because then I know
You have it clean.
I know I wash this thing
Yeah.
properly.
Yeah, you know
You
the
know what I mean?
condition of it.
Yeah. So if people wanted to follow your work online and kind of see what the projects are that you're working on, where could people follow you?
They can follow me personally. I have an Instagram page,
Right.
and my Wild Tobago page. So it's basically the pictorial version of the articles that I write. Wild Tobago is printed in the Tobago Newsday,
Right.
and it targets Tobago audience, but I always try to create bigger connections. So even though it's targeted towards Tobagonians, you connect to Trinidadians, you connect to Australia. I try and bring a lot of my experiences from other places as lessons learned, and sort of hints and tips that we can sort of take from other cultures and whatnot. And I post weekly every Thursday, and so you can follow me on Instagram. You can read the article on Instagram as well.
Right.
And obviously Facebook. I don't know who uses Facebook anymore, but the older audience.
Well, I think all the young people are on
Instagram.
Instagram. I think Snapchat is lost some of its audience.
Yeah, for sure.
And then now there's this TikTok thing, which
I have no idea.
I checked it out, but I'm like,
I don't know.
I mean, I said this in your last episode as well, but I have no right being there. It's like kids.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
young teenagers.
Your age has been defined.
Yeah.
For that, yeah. And then so Speseas as well. We have a website. You can follow us on all the social media platforms except for TikTok.
Right.
And then IMA has their website, and you can feel free to give me a call anytime. At the IMA.
All right, cool. I think the one big takeaway as well is the 3 R's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to drill. We need to drill that in.
Reduce.
Yeah.
As in number one.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to. Yeah. I mean, you know how they say if you repeat it 20 times, it becomes a habit. Like you'll be aware of these new actions, but pretty soon it becomes second nature to grab your things, and like for me, I was a big coffee drinker, so coffee cups, I was throwing away 3 coffee cups a day, and so I was like, okay, let me invest in a very nice looking, mug that I could show off to everybody, and
exactly.
So
yeah, all right,
yeah.
Nice, man. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
It's been cool.